Hello and welcome to Spectator TV. I'm Natasha Feroze and I'm delighted to be joined today by Helen Joyce, a writer and a regular on Spectator TV. And we were going to get you to talk about the puberty blockers story, and I definitely want to come on to that. But it's become apparent today that the world's strongest woman competition has been won by what a lot of people are calling is a man, Jamie Brooks. Now, it's important to say that the evidence is slightly a grey area. There are videos of Jamie saying that Jamie is a trans woman. But I wanted to get your opinion on this, Helen, with the caveat that we don't know specifically, because a lot is changing in women's sport at the moment. And Trump, when he became president, just signed an executive order banning transgender women from competing in women's sport. If this is true, how has this been allowed to happen?
So the executive order can only cover things that the federal government has control of. So it's specifically about Title IX, which is the federal law that requires women and girls, I should say, in educational institutions to be treated fairly in sport, meaning that, you can't just not bother funding women's sport and the rest. And the previous government under Biden, and then before him under President Obama, both of those had sort of reinterpreted all federal law, all mentions of sex and women and male and female and so on, to mean gender identity. That got undone by Trump in his first term and again by Trump in his second term, returning to the biological meaning, which was obviously the meaning that was intended. But that doesn't cover things like this. So, I must say I don't know the details of this particular competition, but in most weightlifting and such like competitions, they're actually private entities. Like, they just run their own events. You would think that they'd have the sense to bar men from the women's category, which should happen in all sporting competition for women, because male advantage in sport is so large, and especially, I must say, in things that use the upper body. So the male advantage in weightlifting is one of the largest. I think only maybe boxing is more. You're talking about 50 to 100% plus advantage. So a quite mediocre man can beat the world's strongest woman in tests that involve upper body strength. The thing is, none of this needs to happen, because there's actually a very straightforward test that's totally non-invasive that can tell whether somebody's male or female, and that's just a cheek swab. And what you do is you send it off to a lab. You just do this once. It's the way that women's sports used to run. And then you get a piece of paper. Like, that's your one and only ever needed test for performing as a woman or competing as a woman. Very occasionally, there's some follow-up that needs to be done in cases of rare disorders of sex development. But for the vast majority of people, this just clarifies whether you're male or female, and then it's done, one and done. And in the context of sport, where there are very intrusive no-notice drugs tests, which involves having to pee in front of somebody, and they have to watch the urine leave your body, and this you can have to do this at any time. In the context of that for professional athletes, it's hardly much to ask for one cheek swab once in your life. So this just shouldn't even arise. This just shouldn't be a question.
And for this winner, Jamie Brooks, you'd think Jamie would want this to be the case as well, because actually it would clear Jamie's name. There's clearly a pylon going on, and if you want to compete in women's categories, surely you want to be classified as a woman, and a cheek swab shouldn't be a problem for doing that.
Well, exactly. You have to ask about someone who doesn't want to do a cheek swab. So we've been here before in the most recent Olympics, in the boxing, where there were two athletes who had failed sex tests in previous situations. They didn't actually do sex testing at the last Olympics, and the IOC itself ran the boxing, and it said passport sex was all that was needed to compete as a woman. So those two athletes have not, to the best of my knowledge, done sex testing since, and the IOC has changed its rules and is now going to require that for the next Olympics, which, by the way, will be in the US, so that might be one of their motivations. But yeah, there was worldwide opprobrium about these two athletes, and, I think I'm pretty certain that both of them are male. The only way to clear that up is to show me a test that shows that they're female. I have functioning eyes and ears. I look at those two people and I see men. It's not nice, the things that were being said about them, that they're being called cheats and so on, but it's just inevitable. They were put in this position when they decided to enter a competition. Like, they know what sex they are, both of them, for sure. The IOC shouldn't have allowed this even to arise. It shouldn't be the case that somebody that we doubt the reality of their sex can make it into women's competition at all. This should all be sorted out of the spotlight. So I very much blame the organisers for creating these situations where, there are individuals who become targeted. My sympathy is a bit limited for them, but, it shouldn't be individuals. It is about the policy. And then women are told they shouldn't be targeting individuals. But you're like, well, come on, then set the policy so that it's fair. I mean, we're in a state of flux. Many more sporting authorities are moving towards requiring sex testing. And that is the inevitable end point. You can't have women's sport unless it's only for women.
I think a lot of the frustration that lots of people like you who will have with this topic is whenever it's been raised, especially at the beginning, people would say, oh, come on, how many transgender athletes are really going to make it to the top? It's going to be a tiny, tiny proportion. And time again, we've seen it happen in boxing, we've seen it happen in swimming. It's now happening with this World's Strongest Woman. We think so in any case, and it was quite upsetting watching the video of the British athlete Andrea Thompson storm off the stage. Do you not think there's slightly an onus on the athletes themselves to probably not partake in the competition in the first place? Because she stormed off stage having got second place. In many cases, you could think, why did you let yourself go up against someone that you've said is a trans woman all along? She did a remarkable job. She only lost by 1 point. Should she not have boycotted the thing straight before, in the same way with the Imani Khalif competition? Why did the Italian boxer go into the ring to get punched to then boycott?
Well, it's misconduct to not take your fight in the Olympics. If this is I'm sorry to say, sheer victim blaming here. If you behave like that, if you refuse to fight or you refuse to compete, you will lose any sponsorship you have. You'll be blacklisted. Your coach will complain about you. Your teammates will complain about you. I mean, this is not what we expected of the men who faced unfair competition from dopers. And this thing that there's only a few of them, like how many is it fair to cheat with anyway? That there was only one person. Like Lance Armstrong was only one person. We didn't say to the other cyclists, oh, come on, don't be sore losers, okay, maybe he's doping or not. It's just one, We don't say that about the things like the shoes that athletes are allowed to wear, the swimsuits, the rackets that they use. And these give a tiny advantage compared to male advantage over female athletes. It's really not for women who have far less opportunity to compete, far less money going into them, far lower prize money, far less sponsorship, for them to give up their only opportunities in order to make a point against the men. Like, I wonder why we don't say to the male athletes in their competition, why don't you boycott in order to make the fair point that these men should be in your competition? I think it's a non-starter as a solution, and a deeply unfair suggestion even.
Now, Helen, last time we had you on Spectator TV was just after the landmark Supreme Court ruling, and we suspected we might be seeing a little bit less of you because it seemed like sort of case closed, this has been done now, and that's what it felt like at the time. Nevertheless, we're back here again, and as I said in the intro, we're here to talk about puberty blockers because a clinical trial has been signed off for King's College London to hand puberty blockers to around 220 teenagers or kids under 16. Were you surprised that, given this puberty blockers have been banned, were you surprised this has gone ahead?
I was very surprised it got ethical approval. So the ban was passed by the previous government, the Conservative government, and then rightly extended by Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary. And it was done by statutory instrument, and it covers all prescriptions of a particular type of drug called a GnRH analogue, which, as you say, halts the process whereby puberty works. But there was built into that statutory instrument was a single exception, which was to allow for a properly constituted clinical trial. And then in her landmark report, Dr. now Baroness Hilary Cass said that the evidence base for the use of puberty blockers and for gender medicine for children generally was so poor that almost no conclusions could be drawn, and that more research was needed. It's one of those things people always say, more research is needed. But she gave a range of research that she thought needed happening. She said that they needed to do the data linkage study, which is the study into the kids who have already been seen by gender clinics. There's 9,000 children who were seen by the Tavistock Clinic, and 2,000 of those received puberty blockers. We have no idea how they're doing. There's never been any follow-up. That was meant to happen as part of CASA's original review, but the adult gender clinics refused to cooperate with her and hand over data. And they were very severely censured for doing that and told that they must. But that study has just disappeared into the void. So, I mean, there's so many things wrong with this new puberty blocker trial, but the first one I would say is, why are we giving drugs that we are pretty sure are harmful? I mean, the likely outcome of this trial, if it were done properly, would be to show that you shouldn't give these drugs to anybody. Why are we doing that when there's data to be mined from those 2,000 with a control group of the 7,000? So they say in the research protocol for this new study that they can't get the information that they want from that group because baseline measurements weren't taken, and they weren't taken in a standardized way. Like, you know, the highest quality medical research is the randomized control trial, where you have measurements going in and measurements going out. This would have to, for example, just presume that the children's IQs and brain scans and bone density and so on were at about average going in, and then look and see what's happening. On the other side, we don't have to expose any more kids to puberty blockers. There's thousands of them. Some of the things that you might want to check only happen many years in the future, and it's a much longer term thing. As I say, there's things like bone density, which doesn't vary very much, healthy bone density. So if there's low bone density in some of these kids, you'd already know that you were pretty sure how it had happened. It's just, I mean, I really just thought they wouldn't be able to get ethical approval for it. And then when I saw the research protocol, I'm sorry, it's a joke. And I mean, not a funny joke, because this is experimenting on children. It's happening over 2 years. 2 years is not long enough to tell anything. They're using a measure of how happy you are. Like, they are also going to do some bone scans and the brain scans, but not well. And it's a ridiculous measure. It's like these kids want puberty blockers. You're giving them puberty blockers and you say, are you happy? Of course they're going to say, I'm happy. And the way that they're getting a control group, it's not a proper control group, is they're going to start half of them later, a year in. And so they're going to compare the kids who've had it for 2 years and the kids who've had it for 1 year. But the kids who are delayed are going to say they're very, very unhappy because these drugs they were hoping they'd get, they're not going to get. And then a year later, they'll say, oh, I'm ecstatic. And the whole thing is just riddled with ideological language throughout. It's not ethical to do research, especially on children, by the way, if you can get that information in a less intrusive way, which I think we can. It's not ethical if you're not designing the study well enough to get useful information. They're not going to get useful information. And I would be very doubtful that they are giving the children and their parents the information that they need to provide informed consent, which the parents must do. We haven't seen the information leaflet, but from what we understand from the protocol, they are not making it clear to kids that this is the beginning of an intended multi-stage pathway. The point of giving puberty blockers is as preparation for going on cross-sex hormones. That's not the stated point, but it's the fact. Like, when these drugs are used out in the wild, 95% plus of the kids go on to cross-sex hormones. So if you are getting consent from the parent of a 10-year-old to put that child on puberty blockers, you are getting consent for that child to be on puberty blockers for 6 years to age 16, maybe 8 years to age 18. And then to go on to cross-sex hormones, and that is a sterilising pathway. I mean, I think that we should call this trial the eunuch-making trial, because that's what the intended consequence of this clinical pathway is to create adult eunuchs, people who have not had their sex organs develop, people who have not developed their sexuality, their sexual orientation, people who have lost their ability to reproduce naturally, so they're sterile. And, this is obviously a human rights abuse. I don't see how it can be done, but that they're doing it in a way that they're not even going to get some serious information. I'm just shocked.
My understanding of the trial is that these kids have already started puberty.
You have to be in Tanner stage 2, I think it's called, which can happen at age 10.
Yeah.
So they're recruiting kids. They're saying from age 10 to 15 years, and I think it's 9 months. So, but it's again, like some of those kids will be well into puberty, but some of them will only just have started.
Okay.
Tanner stage 1 is the stage where you basically don't even really see anything. Like there's things happening inside your body, but you don't see things. Tanner stage 2 is the stage at which you're starting to get some wispy pubic hair, underarm hair. You know, if you're a girl, you'll have your breasts sort of start to bud. But you won't have things like your voice dropping. You still look like a child. Like it's that stage quite early on is the stage that, you know, if you are the sort of monster who thinks that you can turn boys into facsimiles of girls and girls into facsimiles of boys, Tanner stage 2 is when you want to be giving the puberty blockers.
And would you go as far as to say this King's College Research Department are monstrous? Because, I mean, where is their funding coming from?
Well, it's government funding. It's government funding. 10 million was put aside for research into not just this trial, but various other things. It was commissioned, basically there's a chain of responsibility here, and I think that's part of the problem, is I don't think that there's anybody who's really taking responsibility here. So as I say, Wes Streeting's statutory instrument said that there was a loophole for a clinical trial, and money was put aside, 10 million for researching puberty blockers, I think, but maybe it's more broadly child gender medicine. This is only part of it. So then that kind of started an inexorable sequence of events whereby NHS England decided that it would commission this research. That goes to a national body that has underneath it, I think it's like dozens of research ethics committees, which are made up of clinicians, but also lay people. And I mean, they look at things thousands and thousands of times a year. Like this is going on all the time for every study, like that. And ethical approval is normally not that complicated because, you know, it's not out of the ordinary what they're looking at. So we don't know which research ethics committee looked at this, and we're not going to find that out, I don't think, because it's not normal to make that public, because this is a field where there's a lot of money. So you don't want to leave your RECs open to lobbying from the pharma industry.
I see.
So it's secretive, but I understand why it's secretive. So then that came out, and they, to my great astonishment, decided that they would give ethical approval to this study, and we hadn't seen the design of this study before we found out that it had got ethical approval. Why has King's College London decided to do it this way and to do it at all? Well, I mean, I can't answer for them. I'm surprised. I wouldn't like to open myself to that legal risk. I wouldn't like to open myself to that reputational risk. I also wouldn't like to sterilise children. Thank you very much. But at this point, it's hard to see how you stop it. You know, I know that the Health Secretary will say that it's NHS England, and NHS England will say, well, it got ethical approval. And that's a black box for understandable reasons. I mean, I don't think it's a lawful trial myself, so there's a possibility of a legal challenge to it.
What are the next steps legally?
It's because this is being done by a public authority, it's open to judicial review. And what you have to prove there is that the public body that is responsible did not act lawfully. And that means, like, that's quite a high bar, but, you know, there's various things that you can show. One would be that it's just unreasonable what they did. Another would be that they are breaking their statutory obligations in some way. If something's not compliant with the Human Rights Act, that might be another way. And I mean, I'm not a lawyer, and people are at early stages of talking about this, but I mean, already we've heard that there is going to be an application for judicial review. I mean, the thing that, like, what I hear from clinicians, concerned clinicians, is that if you look at the ethical framework for doing research on human subjects, it goes back to the post-Second World War, to the Nuremberg trials. There's a thing called the Helsinki Declaration, which lays out what you have to do if you want to do research on human subjects. It seems hard to me to argue that this trial fits within that framework, because we are exposing children to a known harmful treatment when there were better ways that we could have got at least some of the information. We are interfering with children's natural development, and that's said in the Helsinki Declaration, you don't do that. In general, you have to be able to get informed consent. We haven't seen the consent forms, but from the protocol, I can't see how this is informed, unless they are really telling people, you're sterilising your child, is that okay? So those would be the sort of the medical ethical arguments, that it's so unethical that it cannot go ahead lawfully. But there's also, and this goes back to the last time I was here with you, the For Women Scotland judgment is relevant here. So that judgment, to summarise, said that in the Equality Act, sex means sex, not paperwork, and definitely not gender identity. And we're still seeing the outworkings of that, and a lot of people aren't understanding the implications. But one necessary implication of that judgment is that when it comes to lawful sex discrimination, that's the sort that you have when you have single-sex spaces, that has to mean sex, not anything else. And in particular, that means that a person who identifies as the opposite sex cannot use the opposite sex's spaces. Now, again, people are not really registering this as fully as they should, but that's where we're going to end up. So now think about this child who comes in with their mum. Let's say it's a little boy, so I don't have to mess around with pronouns. And he says, I've known since my earliest days that I'm really a girl. And they say, well, we can block your puberty. The aim, stated or implicit, is that it'll be easier for you to pass as an adult, as a girl, as a woman. But you're not going to be allowed to use women's spaces. We're creating anomalous humans. That's the point of this pathway. Not just eunuchs, but anomalous in their appearance. We're creating men who look like women superficially and women who look like men superficially, when we know, post-4 Women Scotland, that they cannot use the opposite sex's spaces and services. So they will look out of place in those they are entitled to use. And they cannot be encouraged, to say the least, by the NHS and by researchers and by prescribers and by the government to turn themselves into people who will want to expect to use spaces they're not lawfully allowed to. And we don't even have to look into their future. We can just look at school. These kids will all be in school. Are we saying to that 10-year-old, you go into the school and you say, I'm a girl now? Because the school can't accommodate you as a girl. I mean, they never should have for safeguarding reasons, but post-4 Women Scotland, they really can't. So if the school are going to say, well, you're really a little boy anyway, what is it that they're offering these kids? They're saying to them, we can do something for your transition, but what is your transition? They're not pinning it down. They're selling these children a lie, and that lie, those children will be long out of this study. The longest they'll be in it is 2 years. In 2 years' time, they're somebody else's problem. But the rest of their lives has been shaped by it in a way that cannot possibly have been explained to them because it's not lawful what you might explain to them.
And meanwhile, very little funding's gone into the psychotherapeutic trials. We had Az Hakim on Spectator TV a while ago who said that the vast majority of any of his clients that come in through group therapy come out saying they don't want to go through a sex change or any sort of transition. So you'd think that they would bake in some sort of psychological practice before then ending up with a medicinal change. But do you think that there is just an obsession in the UK, but in the world more widely, that we just always want to find a pill to find the solution? And also for these children, if they could say, okay, well, I'm on puberty blockers, it's going to fix me, it might make them feel a bit better.
Well, they'll say that they feel better because what they're in flight from is turning into an adult. Like that's literally the problem that these kids come in with, which is, I don't want to grow up to be the sex that I am. You're not going to grow up to be any other sex. That's not possible. You are your sex. You know, we can interfere and we can try and turn you into a eunuch, but we can't make you grow up to be the opposite sex. So it's an impossible dream. So what you can, like a more realistic way to describe what these children are experiencing is a grave fear of growing up. They're in flight from adulthood. And that's exactly what puberty blockers allows them to do. They can be in flight from adulthood. It's profoundly unethical because it's growing up that sorts out these problems for the great majority of kids. I mean, we know what this cohort are. We know that it's going to be very overrepresented with kids who are destined to grow up same-sex attracted. We know that there's going to be way overrepresentation of kids on the autistic spectrum. We know that there's going to be kids with other adverse life events like, parental breakdown, kids who are in care. We know all of this from the Tavistock. It's a highly unusual and very vulnerable cohort. And they've even got, they've got some things in the protocol about how they're going to deal with the fact that these kids are on the spectrum or whatever, as opposed to thinking like, well, don't go medicating autistic kids who don't understand what it means to be male or female and have got a weird black and white thinking idea in their heads. And the thing about the psychotherapeutic approaches is it's very hard to offer them to children if puberty blockers are on the table. Again, this is what I hear from clinicians. The kids have got a fixed idea that the puberty blockers will solve all their problems. They've been propagandized in schools, online. They think that these things are a magic pill. They think that they're safe, that they're irreversible, that there's suicide prevention. All of those things are untrue. And so they're just fixated on this. And then when a kid is fixated on that sort of pill approach, you can't say to them, let's look at what it is that makes you so scared of growing up to be a woman or a man. You know, I mean, how are they going to screen out the parents who are selling this? Most don't, but some do. How are they going to screen out the parents who always wanted to have a little girl, but they got a little boy? No mention of any of this. The whole thing is just so unethical. I mean, the best thing I can say about this, the clearest thing I can say about this trial is that, you know, trials require a clear research question and a design that enables you to answer that question. None of that is true for this trial.
Lastly, Helen, I just want to ask you about the after effects of the Supreme Court ruling, because it seems like the government's dragging its heels slightly on releasing what their guidelines are going to be. The Equalities Watchdog has laid out its advice, and Bridget Phillipson saying we're going to take our time, we're going to really look through it. Some people might sympathise with them because it's been a few months, and these are really complicated policies, and they need to get it right for each business, hospital wards, all sorts of places. Do you have sympathy for them?
Not at all, not one little bit. This is an absolute disgrace. I mean, a funny thing happened on the day of the Supreme Court judgment, just before I came in here last time. A friend of mine who's very legally knowledgeable, as soon as the crucial word, you know, biological was said, you know, she grabbed my hand, and then afterwards she said, "There's nothing left for us to do." Oh my God, those were innocent days, yeah. So people are just not obeying the law, but the law is the law when the Supreme Court says it.
Yeah.
What the Supreme Court said is this has been the law since 2010. But to be fair, many people misunderstood the law, so okay, they wrote their policies on the basis of a mistaken understanding. The second the word biological came out of Lord Hodge's mouth, if your policies were not compliant, you're not in compliance with the law. And the EHRC, the Equality and Human Rights Commission, said this. It said, don't wait for our guidance, follow the law. And the guidance that they're working on anyway is the guidance for it's the code of practice for service providers. It's not intended to tell you the headline that men aren't women and women aren't men for the Equality Act purposes. It's intended to give you some sort of, you know, suppose you're a small business with some unusual elements to you. Suppose you're a swimming pool and you want to have a women-only session because you have a large Muslim population, 3 to 4 p.m. on Wednesdays. Is that lawful? And you haven't got a lawyer to ask. It's at that level of detail. So it's the code of practice for service providers, not for employers. And it replaces a code that was produced in 2011, which is now clearly unlawful. And in one of those stupid glitches that can happen in government, there is no way of sort of automatically removing that statutory guidance, even though it's now unlawful. You have to act to remove it, but Bridget Phillipson has to act to remove it and act to replace it. So the EHRC did its consultation before and wrote a draft before the Supreme Court judgment, did a little mini consultation after the Supreme Court judgment to fix that, wrote it, sent it to Bridget Phillipson. The procedure is she's meant to lay it before Parliament. She didn't need to do any work on it. There's no work for her to do. The work has been done by the EHRC. Her job is to lay it before Parliament. And she's saying these ridiculous things like we need to consult with the devolved administrations, like Scotland, which was taken to court and lost. Why are you consulting with them? Ridiculous. No, it's just sheer delay, obfuscation. And in fact, we wrote to the EHRC and asked them to withdraw the unlawful guidance, the 2011 one, and they said they can't. Only Bridget Phillipson can do that. They've asked her and she's refused. My sympathy is zero.
Let's see what happens. Helen Joyce, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.